Hello. Welcome to episode 37 of your online strength coach podcast. All about periodization. Gotta love a little bit of Barry. Hello, it's Sunday the 30th of August 2015. This is episode 37 of your online strength coach podcast. And as usual, I'm Mark. And I'm here for your podcast. Today's question comes from Jeff, or John Francis Enemy, as he's known on YouTube. Just quickly, PL700, I will answer that question probably Monday though. Fancied a little bit of change of pace for this episode, so I thought I'd hit up Jeff's question. So I thought it would be not so difficult, although reading the question that may not be the case. Hi Mark, as usual, very good info. Thank you very much, Jeff. Did you consider posting your video and articles on Reddit, powerlifting, or Reddit weight room? I know that a couple of guys like Greg Nicholas are doing this to spread the material. Thanks very much for the tip. I will definitely be trying that. Probably with the next podcast, or maybe with this podcast, we'll see. But I will be trying that. Instagram seems to be the thing to use also. Just started using Instagram about 3-4 weeks ago. And so far it's just been some training videos. I haven't really been posting up any pictures or articles or anything, but I am on Instagram. But only because I kind of find my feet with it, so I am there. So I'm not too far behind the curve. I also have a question for you. Excellent. Is there any difference between classical periodization or undulating periodization, or is it the same at the end of the day? I mean by this, would I get the same results from doing a normal cycle, going from high volume to lower volume, higher intensity, or just having within my training week one high intensity session and one high volume session? Thanks, Jeff. All periodization is essentially the exact same thing. Periodization is in essence of a change in training over time. Now, there are different ways of doing it. When people refer to block periodization, when people refer to classical periodization, they often miss the point. The classical periodization doesn't actually really exist. All periodization is, in essence, the same thing. So when you look at something called block, like for in essence, something like Vershansky would put it across as block periodization, that is in essence, you work on a physical quality, or you emphasize a physical quality in a certain phase of training. So typically a block would be 4 weeks. It's called a macro cycle. In the macro cycle there's 4 weeks, and they're called microcycles of training. I hope I'm not rehashing information you already know, but the idea would be the physical attributes that you develop in one block or one cycle are going to further your gains in the next cycle. So for example, we're talking about strength training. First block would typically be hypertrophy, or what's known as muscular endurance or strength endurance, sets of 10 typically, or high volume. The next 4-week block we would work on maximal strength. The muscular endurance or the volume would mean that the maximal strength block had a greater success. It primes that block, and then from maximal strength you might go on to work on power. The maximum strength primes the power block, and these blocks can be determined lengths, and then you can go into taper and competition, or you can jig it any way you want. But block periodization is one way of doing it. In a sports science sense, block periodization is classical periodization. In a sports science sense. In a lifting sense, when people talk about classic periodization, they often talk about just a defined period. So if you look at within an Olympic sport, you have an Olympic cycle of 4 years. That's your periodization paradigm, if you will. That 4-year cycle. So you got 4 annual cycles. And each cycle in that periodization routine will have different goals, different periods of training. It'll be split up into smaller periods of training, all looking at different sports competencies, different physical competencies, different goals within each block. That's a quad-annual cycle. If you look within a professional sport, you typically don't get past an annual cycle, and the annual cycle won't really be an annual cycle per se. So this is what I would deal with in my job. So we'll look at the season past, look at the training we did, look at the success or the failures of the training, on a weekly basis, what training volumes, intensities, what was the result of the match, or the competitive result from that week. Are there any trends we can pick out? And then for the next annual cycle, again, you lay out your preseason. First of all, you lay off your off season. You lay out your preseason. Then you lay out your in season, and you look at the relative importance of games, and you look in the peak around. For us, we look to peak around May, because that's when European and knockouts, quarterfinals, semi-finals, finals, our league knockouts, semi-finals and finals. That's when they happen typically. So late April, May is when we'd be looking to hit our physical peak as regards power and speed. That's when we would be looking to peak, and to give us the best chance possible of performing in that scenario. So it's not really an annual cycle, because it's not a year long. It's more like a 9-month cycle. It's what you might call a competitive season cycle. So that's another kind of periodization paradigm. And then when we move into something like powerlifting, which is kind of what we're talking about when we talk about undulating periodization, or these are methods of periodization, we're looking at defined periods. So if you look at what gets termed as classical periodization within this sense, we're talking about probably the longest we're talking about here is a 4-month cycle, but it's a period of training with a definite competition in mind, or a definite peak for that competition. Now, depending on who your coach is, you might have an annual cycle for powerlifting, but for most people, when they say classical periodization, they're talking about like a 12-week program where they start at, so they've got definite goals at the end of the 12-week period, and within that 12 weeks, they start at like higher reps. So if you look at the Ed Cohen routines, probably the best known example of what's termed linear periodization, or classic periodization. It's just a different kind of way of splitting up schedule. It's not a special kind of periodization, it's just a way of doing it. You have a 12-week period, you have a squat target, a bench target, a deadlift target. You work back from those targets, and you start at higher reps, low intensities, and for 10 reps I need to hit this. So maybe you spend 2 weeks coming towards that goal. For sets of 8 I need to do this, so you spend 2 weeks working towards that goal. For 6 reps I need to do this, 2 weeks working towards that goal. And then you start a peak after those 6 weeks or 7 weeks, where you go, right, I'm going to do my 5 5s, 4 4s, 3 3s, 2 2s, hit my openers, boom, I'm in the meet, and I hit my targets. Because if you're hitting 10 RMs, 8 RMs, 6 RMs, 4 RMs, 3 RMs, and 2 RMs, all geared towards your target lift at that meet. And within that preparation phase, if you've hit all of those targets, you're good to go. So that's what gets termed as classical periodization, but it's not classical, it's just it's periodization with a specific goal and a specific time frame. If you want to say classical periodization, you're probably talking more like the Olympic 4-year annual cycle, probably with a little bit of block periodization thrown in. That's actually classical per se, because that's probably the oldest form of periodization within sport. But when we look at lifting, of course, because that's what we're talking about, what gets termed as classical periodization is just a finite period of time with definite goals towards a meet, and that's typically like a 10 to 12 week period of preparation, and that's classical periodization. Now, when we talk about undulating periodization, it's to be honest, it's a bit of a gimmick within sports science. Basically, you split your day and you have 3 workouts. So you might have a strength workout where you do low reps, or you do heavy weights with a low to moderate intensity. You might have a power day where you do maybe explosive exercises, low reps, low volumes, and then maybe you have a hypertrophy day where you do like higher volumes of training and lower intensities. That might be a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday split, and you might do common exercises within that, or you might change the exercises for the power day. But basically, you take physical qualities or physical characteristics and try to train them all within the same training week and progress that way. So you look at, whereas in a block periodization, you might look at a physical characteristic and try to develop that within a block, within a 4-week period, or emphasize that within a 4-week period. Within undulating periodization, you have a day for that quality. And then you get something like, I really can't pronounce it, but you know what I mean, when you conjugate periodization, where you train everything at once. So you have like a power exercise, you have a strength exercise, you have a strength endurance exercise. So in that kind of training, you train each quality within the same session. And what all this is just putting things into boxes where there's no need to put something in a box. If you look at something like, so if you're talking about training for sport, which is where most of this is geared towards, if you choose a sled sprint, there's no way that's not going to be done in an explosive, fast way. That's a speed training exercise. It's a power exercise. It's a speed strength exercise. It is by its very nature. That's exactly what it is. If you look at a power clean, it's going to be done to successfully complete the power clean. It needs to move at like 1.2 meters a second. It's a non-negotiable to get the height on the bar and complete it properly. It needs to be done at a speed strength or a strength speed velocity. So within its little box, within its own little world, it's a strength speed exercise. Now, if you look at a back squat, sure, a back squat can be done as a jump. But if you do it as a jump, it needs to travel a certain velocity. It travels at that velocity, it is a strength speed exercise, or speed strength if it's light enough. And then if we look at a heavy back squat, or strength training back squat, it's a strength exercise. It is what it is. So certain exercises train qualities by their very nature. Now, if you look into training for sport, which I know we're not, I'm kind of getting a little bit sidetracked here, but if we're training for sport, you just put together your program in a way where you choose the correct exercises for the correct physical attributes you want to work, and then within that kind of program or that paradigm or whatever you want to say, you look to improve all those exercises. And there you go, you get stronger, you get faster, you get bigger, and if you're working conditioning, you get fitter, all within the same program, all within the same training cycle. Cool. Now we look at that and we go, right, I want to do more hypertrophy work, or I want to concentrate on strength. Well, take away some of the volume from the other things and put them in what you want to work on. And we're still working strength, we're still working speed, we're still working hypertrophy, or we're still working fitness. But we're working more towards our goal by emphasizing that goal within the block. And that's kind of the conjugate, that's kind of the main paradigm within sports training. Or kind of, in my opinion, is definitely the most successful paradigm within sports training. When you train all your physical qualities together and you emphasize in different periods of the training program. Now, when we look at a sport like powerlifting, we look at a sport like weightlifting, are you looking at the development of the lifter over their lifetime? Or are you looking at the development of the lifter for a finite period towards a certain goal? And that's the first question you got to ask yourself. If you're looking towards the development of the lifter over the lifetime, then we need to take a year-by-year basis. So if you're a powerlifter or a weightlifter, you need to sit down, look at your competitions, identify the important ones, identify the non-important ones, and then plan backwards from there. So if you have, let's say, national championships are your most important competition, you will work. So you might do a 12-week preparation phase for that. So that would be your linear periodization or your classical periodization phase. Look, these are the numbers I want to hit here, so this is my preparation for that. Before that, we maybe have a regional competition, That's more of a developmental competition. I need to hit a certain threshold to qualify for nationals, or certain goals that I want to hit. But I don't need to train towards that. I don't need a peaking cycle. I don't need to do a training phase towards that. So we look at within where that sits. We probably want to do more of a. We want to be reasonably strong going into that, or we don't need to be at peak strength, but we want to be strong towards that. So if we're doing a replicable training cycle, so let's say that's 3 months of the year taken out. So let's say we have 9 months left of the year. So within that 9 months, I'm going to do 4-week training cycles. I'm going to take a deload on my 4th week, and I'm going to do a 3-week build-up phase. And I'm going to work. Let's call a real simple cycle. Let's say we're going to do 5 sets of 5, 5 sets of 4, 5 sets of 3. Take the deload, and then we add some more weight. So there you go. Or you can do 5-3-1 for 4 weeks, or you could do like these kind of cycles don't really have a name, but they're like a 4-week block. They're a repeatable block. I kind of call them bridging programs, or I call them sort of it's just like it's training. It's not. There's no specific. The goal is to get stronger, but it's not to specifically peak for a meet or specifically hit any numbers. You're just doing more weight for sets and reps as you go. You're accruing volume in the correct place over time, and gradually those weights are improving. So you take an arbitrary weight, say we go up 2.5%, 5% from cycle to cycle. If we do like a sets by reps, or if we do 5-3-1, then we do the same cycle, and maybe we readjust off our rep PBs every cycle. 2 different examples of doing it. But some are, you look at a 5-week cycle, or a 6-week cycle. You're working with any kind of periodization is working within a finite time span. The best kind of training programs, or the best periodization for the general trainee, kind of works on a 4-week, 3-week, or a 5-week template, and it produces. There's high volume at the start of it. There's low volume at the end. There's a deload, and basically you're hitting many peaks, but you're not peaking out. You're not taking yourself to your physical capabilities. So there's no real there's no trough after your peak. You hit it like a mini peak, and you can go again. You can go again. You can go again. That's kind of the best kind of training outside of like a classic or a linear or a peaking phase, where you have a definite time frame and a definite goal. In my opinion, towards a meet, that's the best way to train. Outside of a meet preparation, if you're just training to train, then a really well put together 3 to 5 week cyclical phase of training is probably the best way to go for anybody else. Now, can this be done using undulating periodization? Yes, it can. However, let's not lose sight of that we're just putting things in boxes when we say something like undulating periodization. When we look at powerlifting, you have your competitive lifts, and you have your specific preparation, your sport-specific preparation for those competitive lifts. So your squat volume, your bench volume, your deadlift volume, that's your meet-specific preparation. That's the most important thing you do within the gym, within that context. And then we have our hypertrophy, or we have our assistance work. That's your hypertrophy, your muscular endurance work. These 2 things sit in the same program, but within some programs we don't call them that. We don't say this is your hypertrophy part of the session, this is your sport specific part of the session, because we don't put things in boxes, we put it down. So we're going to squat, we're going to bench, and then we're going to do assistance. In a block periodization, in a daily undulating periodization, this fucking stupid name. We'd say this is the sport specific prep part of the session. If we're squat, it's bench. Now we're going to do the hypertrophy part of the session. It's dumbbell press, it's pull downs, it's back extensions. Now we're going to do the muscular endurance part of the session. Strong endurance, it's your ab work, it's planks. It's hyperextensions, hyperholds, is that kind of lower level abdominal work. You just put shits in boxes. It's just a way of putting it differently, basically. And it doesn't get better results. It at best gets the same results. If you look at this topic in a research sense, and you look at meta-analysis done on on daily undulating periodization against linear periodization, and they've found zip. There's no difference. And within that meta-analysis, I'm not going to search for it. If you search for on Google Scholar or on daily undulating periodization meta-analysis, you'll find it. There was like 10 papers, if that, with a cohort of 100 athletes, 200 athletes. So it's a poor meta-analysis. But you think within periodization, such a large topic, it would be very well researched. Well, however, that's not the case, because it's difficult to actually do a periodization study, because it's a long-term training study, and to get the numbers and to actually get the methodology right and to do that, it's difficult. So it's a very understudied part of the sports science literature. So from an objective, if you want, or a scientific viewpoint, we don't have an answer to your question, because it's the same fucking thing. Periodization is just how you split up your training. It doesn't really matter how you split up your training. What matters is, it doesn't matter if you do your assistance. It doesn't matter if you do your power work. It doesn't matter if you do your speed, your power, your strength, your assistant, or your hypertrophy work all on the same day. As long as it's sequenced correct. Well, what's important with your training is that you sequence it correctly. So you do whatever needs to be done first, whatever needs to be done second, whatever, you do your velocity first, then you do your power, then you do your maximum strength, then you do your strength endurance, and then if you're conditioning, you do it after that. That's a well sequenced training day. Then that will be effective. So your sequencing is correct. That's important. Number 2 is your training intensities and volumes are appropriate for the stimulus you want. So if I'm looking for a strength endurance stimulus at the start of my block, I make sure that my volumes are correct, my intensities are correct, my frequencies are correct. So that I'm targeting the part of the strength curve that I want, or the strength velocity curve that I want, or the force velocity curve that I want to develop. And I'm producing a stimulus, and I'm allowing enough time within that program for recovery. That's correct. So that's the second thing. Make sure your volumes, your intensities, and your frequencies are appropriate for developing what you want. And then within your periodized schedule, make sure you're allowing enough time frame for that to happen. So I've allowed enough time for this part of the program, for this volume accumulation phase of my program. I've allotted an appropriate amount of time where we're going to get the training stimulus that I want. We're not going to overreach. Or if we are going to overreach, we're going to do it within this time frame, and then I'm going to pull back and allow the overreach to kind of take effect, and then we'll hit the upswing of that overreach. Then we're working on this thing, So the time phasing, make sure if the time phasing is correct. So if the sequencing is correct, the volume, intensities, and the frequencies are correct towards your goal, and if your time sequencing is correct within your program or within your periodization routine, you make sure you're hitting peaks when you want to hit peaks. You're not peaking when you don't want to peak. And when you hit a peak, you make sure you're pulling back and you're recovering. You make sure if you're overreaching, you make sure you're doing the appropriate training after the overreach. You make sure you're doing sufficient training to overreach. You make sure you're not overtraining. Basically, if it's all put together properly, then you have a well periodized program. Now, if you want to do all of your systems on Friday, all of your strength work on Monday, all of your speed power work on Monday, all of your strength work on Wednesday, you want to do all of your systems work on Friday, fine. As long as all of the prerequisites are fulfilled, then you have a good program. If you want to call that daily undulating periodization, feel free. It doesn't change the fact that you're just periodizing, you're just making a program. Whether it's an annual program, An Olympic cycle, a quad-annual program, a 10-year plan, a long-term athlete development program, they're all words for the same thing. We all do the same thing. It's programming within a time frame. And if you want to call it undulating periodization, or classical periodization, block periodization, or conjugulate periodization, or fucking whole military, your Maj Fanny's periodization, doesn't change the fact that it's the same fucking thing. So that's the answer to the question. They're the same thing. So if you find a well put together cycle, or a well put together repeatable cycle, like 531, like the Juggernaut method, like the cube, like any program that I've put together, then you're gonna get gains, because the volumes are correct, the frequency's correct, there's a stimulus there, there's appropriate recovery with the stimulus, and you're gonna have a good time. So yeah, do it if you want. But that's okay. That's enough now. Well, that's answered your question. Probably over answered your question. But when I start going, pretty hard stop. I will be answering the how far can we go question as an actually answer the original question, in the sense of how far as a trainee can you go, not as far can we take the world powerlifting records. So that'll be Monday. That'll be fun. Okay, so it's 9 o'clock on a Sunday night, so I'm wrapping up. I'm gonna go to bed. Hope you've enjoyed it. If not, don't worry about it. Comments, questions, please leave them below. Like and subscribe. Come check us out at castironstrength.com, or check out the shell of the website that is onlinestrengthcoach.com. Hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, this is Mark signing out. I'll leave you with Barry.
I'll do